Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment for the Lenovo Yoga C940. First and foremost, I want to point out that this is, in my opinion, arguably one of the best 2-in-1 Ultrabooks ever made. Yes, Lenovo did that good of a job putting this machine together. So let's go over pricing and specifications. $1,730 US from Best Buy for this model that I've been using for well over a month now. And as I've already mentioned, it has been a pleasure to use. You've got Intel's 10th gen Core i7 processor, the 1065 G7, under the hood, complemented by 16 gigs of RAM and a ½ terabyte Intel SSD. We have two Thunderbolt 3 ports on the left, as well as a Type A port and a headphone jack. I'll give a tour of the body a little bit later. We also have a power button on the right side, a garaged active pen on the back, which I love that we have a place to actually store the pen. This should be done by more manufacturers. Dell does it, Lenovo does it. I wish more did it. Of course, Microsoft now with the Surface Pro X also has a place for a pen, but I digress. So at $1,730, it certainly isn't inexpensive. But as I mentioned, you're getting one of the best, if not the best, 2-in-1 on the market, depending on your needs. And another pro to this $1,730 build is Lenovo's 4K 14-inch display, or technically 13.9-inch IPS display. Very solid overall, in my opinion. A bright display rated at 500 nits, and in general, color accuracy is fairly solid. It is not as good as some competing devices like the HP Spectre, at least in the OLED version that I've been reviewing. But as far as IPS displays go on 2-in-1s, this is easily one of the best out there. In terms of the trackpad or touchpad, very good overall performance. These are precision drivers, for those of you that are wondering. Some people have asked me about dead spots, and you know, for the most part, I don't experience dead spots, but I have. And so while right now in the course of this test, I'm not seeing it happen, I can concur with those of you that have asked, and some of you have I experienced any dead spots towards the edges of the touchpad? And I have. Rare, but they do exist. Remember, this isn't a perfect machine, but as I've stated, it is one of the best out there. Audio performance from Lenovo's soundbar hinge is best in class. I don't care what machine you're looking at right now. I have yet to see any Ultrabook in this size. Remember, 3 pounds for this Ultrabook with a 14-inch display. And of course, you can go full HD instead of 4K, and that will yield a significantly better battery life. But I have yet to find a machine with audio quality to this level in anything else in this class. So that is certainly a nice feature of the Yoga C940, a bragging right, if you will. You may have noticed we have a fingerprint scanner. Well, that's because not only is that relatively standard these days, but there is no Windows Hello at that, you know, top-mounted camera as you would traditionally expect from a premium Ultrabook. And if I had to take away a point from this machine, that would be the point I would be taking away, because there is literally not another Ultrabook that I'm reviewing right now that does not have a Windows Hello IR camera. Now, the camera on here is fine. It does have a privacy switch right there that you can toggle on and off. But to not have Windows Hello, again, at this price point with such a premium device, it does make me scratch my head a little bit. I'm not sure why they couldn't fit it, they being Lenovo, when, of course, HP with the Spectre X360 13T with literally nearly zero bezel was able to cram an IR Windows Hello experience into the top of that bezel. So moving away from the Windows Hello issue, which really isn't an issue, but I wish it were there. It's more convenient than fingerprint scanners, in my opinion. I really don't have many complaints about this machine. Battery life, fairly solid, 6 to 8 hours, depending on your usage. Overall performance with the Ice Lake 10th Gen 1065 G7 has been solid. I've benchmarked this machine time and time again. You can easily toggle in and out of performance modes just using Lenovo's quick keys, which is function Q. So right there you see auto, performance, and then quiet. Now, a lot of people have asked me about the fans spinning up on this machine, and through the course of this video, the machine isn't doing anything, right? No fans spin up, and that's the way it should be. But there have been many instances where they did spin up when I was doing very light tasks like browsing the internet. And, you know, what can I say? This happens on virtually every machine out there. I do not find the fan noise on this machine to be a nuisance. Of course, when you're taxing it, if you're video editing, 1080p or 4K, so it doesn't really matter. Yes, they will spin up. If you're gaming, they will spin up. And yes, this machine with Iris Plus can game. Are you going to game at 4K? No, you're not. Can you game at 1080p or 720p? Absolutely. Will they be the most current titles? No, it's not going to be able to handle that. For that, you need dedicated graphics under the hood. And you should be looking at its 15-inch sibling, which does sport the 1650, I believe. And I think that is a very value-oriented machine, unlike this. So what don't I like about the Lenovo? Well, before I get to that, one thing I left out, pen performance. Very good, and I'll show you a quick example. They, as opposed to most manufacturers these days, they incorporate Wacom as opposed to N-Trig. N-Trig is what you'll find on every Surface device. You'll find it in the HP Spectre. You'll find it on Lenovo, not Lenovo, on Dell's machines. But here we get Wacom, which is relatively rare these days. And you can see this sketch that my fiance did, something she really couldn't perform with the HP Spectre. So that tells you a little bit. I mean, she can attempt it, she can get close, but I know that the performance, and that's with the standard pen with the Spectre, she was able to feel a higher comfort level, higher level of accuracy with what she was trying to sketch using the C940 than the HP Spectre. Now, does that apply to things like the Surface Pro line? No, she did fairly well and had very few complaints about the Surface Pro lineup. But, you know, Microsoft's pen input is best in class, even if it is N-Trig at the end of the day. So this was just a quick example, and I will show you right now a little bit of writing myself. I've got the pen right there in the garage, and I do like the way this is done. I know that it used to be spring-loaded, which I think was a little bit more convenient, but I don't think that it's bad that they've gone to removing the spring, because apparently people were breaking the device, breaking the actual garage there, so that then it couldn't eject. So I understand why they did this. Now, you can see there's some line jitter here. There's no question about it. Granted, this was a quick sketch. The sensitivity and overall inking with this is fairly good. And that's really the good news overall, because there's no question it didn't have to be this good. Let me go ahead and open up the whiteboard to just show you, because that was an image I went to write on. And I mean, immediately you can see I'm getting fairly straight lines, I would say, and that's better than you're going to do with a lot of other solutions out there. Sensitivity is also fairly good. You can see I've got a light line there, and then I press, we're getting a thicker line. So, you know, the rigidity, or the flex, I should say, I think is fairly good. But is this going to be a perfect experience? Absolutely not. All of these 2-in-1s are really more proof of concept. I wouldn't say that that equates to it being a toy, because I don't think this is a gimmick feature. I think this is something people use on a regular basis. But I will say that I am not a fan of this pen. I mean, when I look at other pens I have here, the HP Tilt pen, I mean, you start to see why I would prefer the Tilt pen over something like the Wacom stylus that's included here. It does recharge. You can see the contact points. In one of my earlier videos, I, like an idiot, said it was passive. Of course, I corrected a long time ago, but it may as well be passive in terms of its form factor, because this is something from yesteryear, and I wish that they could garage a normal size pen. But of course, this is a matter of actual space inside the chassis. And when I look at just a collection of other pens I have over here, you know, whether we're talking about an older Surface pen or HP standard pen or the Vaio Canvas Z pen, which was one of my favorites, this is hard to transition over to. Now, you can just go ahead and get whatever Wacom compatible stylus you want, so you do not need to use this, but that of course kills the convenience of having the garage door that is a bragging right of this machine. So that pretty much covers it. You're not going to get perfection out of this or anything else, but I thought this was a fairly good example of what this machine is capable of. And I mean, overall, again, my fiance being the artist, me being just a note taker, her input was pretty clear that the performance of the Yoga was pretty much at the top of the class. So that puts it right there in, you know, Microsoft's company. And I think that's a pretty big vote of confidence for the Yoga C940. So we've gone over battery life, we've gone over general performance, we've gone over the 4K display, which I mentioned is great, and it is. I mean, I can play some 4K video for you. It's not necessary, but I will, and that's because among the machines that I reviewed, this really was one of the best out there, and I just have no complaints about what this is able to do. 14-inch, nearly almost bezel-free, and I mean, if you're talking about a machine that should be able to be a content consumption master, this does it. This is garbage, though, in the upper right. So, I mean, it's just a beautiful panel and audio performance to match, which I wish I could say was the case with my HP Spectre. I mean, I love the Spectre X360 Ice Lake refresh. They did a great job, specifically on the 13T. Not really so interested in the 15. The performance of the OLED does outclass this, but at the expense of audio being lackluster or mediocre. Here, the sacrifice is less because you have a balance between audio and visual. And for most consumers, I think that strikes the correct balance. I don't think most consumers care as much about having an OLED as I do. So for mass consumption, for the majority of the market, I think the Yoga strikes a better balance than the Spectre, believe it or not, even though I have chosen to go with the Spectre. Now, the Yoga is going to a family member, so don't think it's getting returned. It's not. It's that good of a machine that I really didn't want to see someone who was in the market for a laptop not go for something like this, because it really is a fantastic machine. I can easily recommend this to anyone out there. Wi-Fi performance is best in class right now for laptops. I mean, it is based around the Intel 200 series chipset, which is pretty much in every high-end Ultrabook out there. And when we look at, you know, Cinebench, 3D Mark, Geekbench, everything that I ran, this pretty much outperforms everything other than the Razer Blade Stealth 13. Also an Ice Lake refresh. And remember, the Razer Blade does have the NVIDIA 1650 Max Q on board. So it has dedicated graphics where this doesn't. So graphically speaking, gaming, video rendering, that machine can pretty much, you know, squash the Lenovo, but it will also squash any other competing products. Another thing I want to talk about is the finish. I went with the Mica finish, and I happen to like it a lot. Why? Because this silver finish, I initially didn't think it was as nice looking as the iron gray. I think the iron gray is a little more masculine. This is, I think, more of a unisex, not that the iron gray isn't unisex as well. I mean, who are we kidding? Any color except for, you know, extremes is unisex, right? Everybody likes what they like, nothing wrong with that. But one advantage this has, and I'm not sure the iron gray does, is fingerprint resistance. All of the laptops, Ultrabooks I've been reviewing, you know, I talk about the color scheme, I talk about how bad or good they fare when it comes to fingerprints. This does a fantastic job. Now, my HP in the natural silver also does a great job, so I think it really comes down to that silver color being a little bit better when it comes to fingerprints than the incredibly popular matte black finish that not only Microsoft is employing, but many other manufacturers. I mean, even the HP in its, you know, black-ish color that it's launching, you know, it's been selling pre-built that I have covered, that I had 2 defective units out of the box, that thing's a fingerprint magnet. So if you're anal about fingerprints, you're going to do better with this finish than most other laptops on the market. So that's another thing I want to point out. It's just a practical thing that you don't realize until you're already in, so to speak, with a laptop. You've already purchased it. I mean, maybe it's something a lot of people are focused on. I don't think it is. They like a color, they buy it, and then they find out later. So that's another thing I wanted to let you know. In terms of heat dissipation, how hot does the Yoga C940 get? Well, the good news with this machine is that I don't feel that it gets overwhelmingly warm. And that's really good news because my HP Spectre does. So I think this does a better job staying cool than the Spectre. But overall, from a build quality perspective, this is the only non-Microsoft product that I do feel is really built as well as Microsoft's lineup. But of course, without squandering ports. I mean, what will you find from Microsoft that has Thunderbolt ports, that is a 2-in-1, like this with a 10th gen Intel processor? Oh wait, yeah, none. So this is an impressive machine in just about every regard. I do wish that it had a micro SD card slot, but maybe that's something Lenovo will consider down the road for next gen. As you can see on the left side, here are the ports that I mentioned at the top of the video, the Type A, the two Type-C Thunderbolt 3 ports. You can charge with either one of these, but as you may have noticed, there is an LED in between the two ports to let you know where you're at with charging. The LED will go from amber to a white light or blue light, however you see it with your eyes, to let you know that it is completed its charging cycle. Charging roughly takes a little over 2 hours for a complete charge. A lot of manufacturers these days have been stating that you can get 80% in an hour. I don't know what they're talking about. I guess that's kind of like the promised numbers on performance when it comes to battery life that no manufacturer stands up to. You can see your headphone jack right there, and then nothing else really along the body. Very clean. There is a power button on the other side, and I like that the power button has stayed where I believe power buttons belong. A lot of manufacturers, like Microsoft, like Razer, put the power button on the keyboard. I'm not a big fan of that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but there is something to be said for having a power button where power buttons have always lived. And then, as I've mentioned, this soundbar is the hinge, which means that no matter what mode you're in, your audio performance carries through, and it really is great. The pen garage, you need to have clearance for the pen to actually exit the housing, so be aware of that. If you have the machine open, you're not getting it out. And that speaks true, of course, to going in this entire direction for any mode that you plan on using it. The overall hinge quality is very good. You're not going to see this flop around too much, which I like. And when it comes to opening this, I got so many questions. I didn't know there was a one-handed fetish out there, but you can open this with one hand. But once you get to nearly, opening it completely, that's where the bottom of the machine will lift up. That is not a problem. It's not a flaw. It's just something I'm pointing out. Now, when it comes to the keyboard, I like the keyboard. The key travel is good, but this is not my favorite keyboard. My favorite is the Spectre's keyboard. It's another reason I went with the Spectre. The Spectre not only has more keys, but better overall feel and travel than this keyboard. But I do like the dedicated buttons that they have. I mean, fairly standard, but still important to have. We have a camera privacy on the F8. We have, of course, brightness control right here, volume control right here. You can mute the microphone. It's nice to have these dedicated features. I do, however, prefer the fact that the HP actually has an LED indicator on some of those keys to let you know, reassure you that if you don't remember whether or not you've muted your mic or you've put on the privacy on your camera. Actually, I'm not sure that one has an LED indicator, but you get the point. It's good to have a visual cue. I think it was smart of HP to go that route, but this does have a trackpad that's larger than the Spectre and than most machines in its class. But that comes at an expense, right? This is a 14-inch, 3-pound Ultrabook, and it does fit a 13.9-inch display into a body that traditionally would have a smaller screen, and that's because they've narrowed the bezels. However, this is still very large when compared to my HP Spectre, and the difference in the display size is only 13.3 up to 13.9. These are both 16:9 displays, so that makes me feel like we should have got more out of this keyboard. Yes, we got a nice, large, precise trackpad. But the keyboard, I mean, could they have thrown in a num key, numerical pad? Could they have done more with it? It's kind of strange that I have more dedicated keys on the smaller HP Spectre X360 13T Ice Lake Refresh. And you're going to hear me bring that up because that is the direct competition to this machine, as well as the XPS 13, but I'm kind of done with Dell for now, for the most part. I feel they're doing a lot of things right, but to me, the shining stars of the Ice Lake class were really the Yoga C940 and the Spectre, the most innovative. And Dell has done a great job, don't get me wrong. The XPS 13 is a really nice 2-in-1, but, there are too many issues that I have long-term dealt with as a Dell user that I wasn't really interested in going down that road, for those of you that are wondering why it's not more in my discussion here. So, again, very good keyboard, not as good as the HP Spectre X360 2-in-1, at least the 13T. I can't speak to the 15-inch model. And overall, again, this machine, whether you're looking to, just browse the web, use its included stylus, do some 4K or full HD video editing with your suite of choice, light gaming, you can see I've got Counter-Strike, CSGO installed, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It can handle those games without an issue. You're going to get, with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I mentioned this, it was over 30 frames per second, which is very good for a machine like this that, does not have dedicated graphics. Once upon a time, that was just a fantasy. So to have that here now is really solid. However, with the size of this machine, I kind of wonder, could they have put a dedicated GPU in here? After all, the Razer, again, the Razer Blade Stealth, that 13-inch Ultrabook does have dedicated graphics. And I feel like this machine is larger. It may, be approximately the same weight, but it's got a bigger footprint. So that makes me feel like Lenovo could, up the game here by giving us a dedicated GPU in a build like this. And I hope they do that. That's another thing that I want them to address. If they could throw an OLED into this, this would be my dream machine. Even with the keyboard that isn't as good as the Spectre, I would go to this, even without Windows Hello. All right? But Windows Hello should be there as well. I mean, this is a premium machine in every regard. I mean, there's nothing for me to really criticize other than the Windows Hello being missing. That's something that should be there. And if that's the worst thing going on with this machine, that's really, really good. Now, no quality control problems, which is the opposite of my experience with the HP Spectre X360 2-in-1. So again, performance is good, battery life is good, great display. The form factor is a little bit big for me. That's part of the reason I didn't pick this machine. If you want to know, if you're wondering, Ed's praising this thing. He's talking about how it's one of the best 2-in-1s. Yeah, it's a little too big for me. That's what it comes down to. If I'm looking for, and I don't mean it's too heavy, I just mean the physical form factor, the amount of space it's going to take up in my bag when I travel. That's where the C940 is a little larger than I was looking for. And if the HP Spectre X360 didn't get the redesign where it shrunk by, not a third, but close to that, I mean, it really was shrunken. Honey, I shrunk the laptop over there. Then I would not be talking about this Ultrabook size. That is really the base of comparison where I say, wow, they were able to cram all of the same hardware, all of the same capability into such a small machine. Granted, it's still a dense machine, the X360. It is. And they weigh about the same, but its footprint is considerably smaller, and that means it can fit places this machine simply cannot. Granted, I will have to store that pen somewhere else. That's unless I use HP's included folio case, which I think is fine, but it doesn't exactly ooze quality. They could have gone a little bit more into a quality realm with that. I mean, their packaging is more expensive than that folio that they included. But overall, inking is great. You've got a great processor under the hood. I do wish they gave us a larger SSD, and I wish it wasn't the Intel Optane drive. I mean, that seems to be the industry standard for pre-builts these days, and that's because I assume it's the least expensive one you can incorporate into a pre-built machine. From a performance standpoint, it's not awful, but it's nowhere near the performance I'm getting out of the 2 terabyte Toshiba that HP put into the custom build that I ended up going with. So something to be aware of. Samsung and Toshiba, in my opinion, are your best available options out there. Intel isn't bad, but it is certainly not going to be a performance best. Again, I wish we had a micro SD card slot. I know most of you out there may or may not care, but to me, not having that I/O is somewhat critical. I mean, as a photographer, and also forget whether you're a photographer, videographer, any of those things, why not have the ability to extend your storage, at least from that perspective? You don't have to be dropping files from a camera or video camera. Why not just have that capability for ease of use? I mean, I recently unboxed this little 1 terabyte micro SD card, and I mean, having that on board, if I could get it into focus, being able to drop a terabyte of storage onto a machine like this, you know, so that you extend yourself, I see no downside to having that. It's better for consumers, and it really takes up no space. And again, there's so much room on this chassis, and that's why I'm bringing it up. There's just no excuse for not having a micro SD card slot on this machine. That's it. Now, again, I mentioned full HD, you'll get better battery life. That's about the only difference, and the price, of course, will be less. I do not recommend going with the 12 gig of RAM model that is sold at Best Buy. Do yourself a favor, get the 16 gigs. That cannot be user upgraded. The SSD can, so if you want to ditch the Intel drive, which I probably would, go ahead and do so. I mean, NVMEs these days are fairly affordable, and when it comes to actually replacing that, it's going to be messy. And that's another reason, if you don't want to open this thing up, I recommend just getting the capacity you need direct from Lenovo. So, of course, you have to remove these Torx screws, and then you've got to remove, I believe, this strip, and you've got more screws under the hood. But once you get that off, very easy to replace the SSD from what I've seen. It's just a matter of whether or not you want to actually have to do that. Also, if you want to do a clean install of Windows, that's a good idea because, you know, there is bloatware on here. Maybe one day manufacturers will learn, like Microsoft did when they entered the hardware game, and any laptop you buy from the Microsoft store, you will have a bloat-free system. I don't know why I know why manufacturers aren't doing it. It's because they're selling advertising real estate on these machines. And quite frankly, I wish they would give us an option to pay to throw those things away. But they have licensing agreements, and as a result, you know, our laptops are turned into NASCAR automobiles. And they make it a real pain in the ass to get rid of that crap. I wish they wouldn't do that, but they do. So is the 15-inch option a good option? Well, in my opinion, it really comes down to whether or not you need that extra horsepower. I was very tempted because of the size of this machine, and this shows you why I opted against it, to really start considering the 15-inch. Because, of course, they do have one with a 4K IPS display, same level of brightness, same color accuracy. So I was very tempted, but I was getting myself into an even larger machine, and portability was one of my chief objectives here with this 10th gen little powerhouse. And this was already getting larger than I wanted. So while I was tempted by the dedicated GPU, as well as the overall performance bump with that 9th gen chip, which even though it's not 10th gen, so it's not the latest and greatest, it is a more powerful processor. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned, that was going down a rabbit hole for me personally of getting an even larger machine, and I don't recommend anyone do that when you have an option like this. And that's why I wish that Lenovo would give us a dedicated GPU option. I think people would pay for it, and it would obviously take the Razer Blade Stealth 13 head on. No one else right now is, and I think that's a mistake by big box manufacturers like Lenovo, HP, Dell. They should be doing this. They're not. But specifically Lenovo, because this is, again, the largest Ultrabook that I would ever consider, and it's still offering what smaller, you know, the XPS 13 2-in-1 as well as the Spectre X360 2-in-1 offer. But if the only gain is getting a 13.9-inch display, I like that move, but not at the expense of everything being larger without gaining anything else. So I think that's the main takeaway. By the way, the backlighting on the keyboard I haven't really talked about because it's adequate. There's nothing really to mention about the backlight performance. You may or may not see it here. It's not, you cannot change the color. You're only going to be able to do that with the Razer Blade Stealth 13, and that's still not going to be something where you can control individual keys. Eventually, I'm sure we'll see that, but for now, traditional backlighting, it works in steps and it works well. So whether whatever you want to go with, that's controlled with the space bar. You can see right here. So it's just function and the space bar. I'm cycling through the levels again. I don't think you're going to be able to tell, but it does its job as expected, much like everything on this machine. So as I stated at the top of this video, and I know it's running long at 30 minutes, but I don't know what you expected. This is a long-term review. This is one of the best you can drop your money on. So whether you're looking at this for yourself, a family member, a friend, a spouse, a child, whoever it is, you will not regret buying the C940, in my opinion, as long as you understand everything I've stated, and it is the machine in terms of specifications and overall capability that you're looking for. So, I mean, the C940 is hard to go wrong with. Again, the only two drawbacks for me, no Windows Hello and its literal form factor. But in terms of what it has going for it, literally everything about it. Again, best-in-class build quality, best-in-class overall functionality. The pen experience is one of the best you're going to get, and easily rectified by getting rid of this little stylus. But again, that undoes having the garage. The actual IPS panel on here is very good. It's not the best, but it's very good. Touchscreen input, perfectly fine. Light gaming is completely possible with this machine. Again, don't expect new AAA titles to run on here. I'm not saying they can't, you won't want to. And this is perfectly fine with the i7 for video and photo editing, using any suite of your respective choice, Photoshop, Vegas, whatever it may be, Premiere, you're going to be fine with this machine. So I can recommend this without any reservation or hesitation. The Lenovo C940 is a winner. I can't say the same about the 15-inch version, again, because that's just getting bigger, and if I had to look at the 15-inch, I'd be considering every desktop replacement oriented machine on the market, even though it's a 2-in-1. That's what happens with me, at least. I'm going to look at all the competing products. Here I have, and the C940 is without question one of the best on the market and absolutely worth its price of admission, especially if you get it on sale. So that pretty much wraps things up from my experience with the C940. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.